The vicious murderer responsible for the infamous Black Dahlia murder in 1947 avoided authorities for more than 50 years. In 1947, the images of the Black Dahlia case were blurry and grainy, but AI improvement has revealed startling new information. Previously unnoticed marks are now visible to detectives. Her body was positioned in a deliberate manner. Both extensive surgical abilities and medical training were necessary. The cuts were too neat, too accurate, and the placement was too ideal. This is something that only someone with years of training could do. Investigators discovered a precise match between the enlarged photos and 1930s medical textbooks, someone the police might have shielded. On July 29, 1924, Elizabeth Short was born in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. From the outside, her family appeared to be normal. In the 1920s, her father, Cleo, built miniature golf courses and earned a nice living doing it. People adored the mini meals, which were popular all over America at the time. Her family seemed to have it all. However, things quickly changed. Cleo lost everything when the stock market crashed in 1929, when Elizabeth was just 5 years old. Something even more sinister occurred a year later. Cleo left his car at the Charlestown Bridge in 1930, giving the impression that he had plunged off and committed suicide. He didn't. He left his wife and 5 girls behind and just disappeared. They thought he was dead for years. They arranged what they believed to be his funeral. But in California, Cleo was still alive and making a fresh start as if none of them had any significance. Phoebe, Elizabeth's mother, would not accept him back when he eventually wrote to them. Elizabeth, however, never let go. She continued to correspond with him, as if she still desired his affection or perhaps his assistance in the future. She was eternally altered by that moment. That kind of treachery never truly healed her. Her early years weren't much easier. She has severe respiratory issues. Winters in Massachusetts were nearly fatal due to bronchitis and asthma. To help her breathe, surgeons made incisions in her lungs when she was only 15. Her physique was permanently scarred by that surgery. She was finally informed by doctors that she couldn't survive in the cold in 1940, when she was 16 years old. She had to go. She began spending the winters in Miami with family friends at that point. She didn't return to school. Everything was shaped by that illness. It gave her a frail, almost spectral appearance. However, it also gave her a surreal appearance that people never forgot. She was constantly running from something: pain, illness, the cold, or the past. During the Great Depression, Phoebe, her mother, was working as a bookkeeper in Massachusetts and attempting to provide for her 5 kids on her own. They moved out of their house and into a tiny Medford apartment. Elizabeth attended Medford High School, where her peers referred to her as Deanna Durbin. At the time, Deanna was a well-known actress, and Elizabeth held on to that moniker as if it allowed her to be someone else. She has those messages in her high school signature book. She lived inside movies, not just watching them. When she didn't have movie auditions, she would claim to have them. She thought she could be saved by Hollywood. She began working in a Florida drugstore in 1940, the same year she left school. Her pals referred to her as Betty. However, that store was more than just a job. It turned into her stage, practice area, and mirror. She experimented with several styles and looks. She spent all of her money on clothing rather than savings, and she wore black outfits and long gloves. Vanity was not the reason behind the transition from ill girl to beautiful young lady. It was a matter of survival. She was observed. She attracted attention. She looked like she belonged in black and white movies even before she made it to Hollywood. Then her oldest wound was reopened by the shock. A letter came in December 1942. It came from her father, Cleo, who 13 years prior had staged his suicide. He was still alive and employed at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California. 18-year-old Elizabeth went to accompany him. She must have thought that it would make everything better. It didn't. He had no desire for a daughter. He wanted a maid. While he worked, he expected her to cook and clean. Elizabeth, however, was already independent. She had changed from being that type of girl. She remained up late. She was in a relationship. She had a dream. That didn't sit well with Cleo. A few weeks later, in January 1943, he threw her out after calling her lazy. She was alone once more. The last break was that Elizabeth didn't have a place to live. She had nowhere stable to stay, no work, and no savings. She started to briefly reside in other people's homes. She was once discovered sleeping in a movie theater and allowed to stay for a bit by a family. But in the end, even they urged her to go. She had a lot of bad habits. She continued to float since she wasn't what they had anticipated. She survived by using her attractiveness. Everything, including food, lodging, and favors, hinged on her ability to win people over. However, underneath the lovely exterior was a girl who had experienced repeated abandonment. She was now unsure of her place in the world. She landed in Camp Cook, a military installation next to Lampak, on January 29, 1943, and started working as a cashier at the PX. Elizabeth was described as quiet but beautiful by the woman in charge, Inns Keeling. The warriors fell in love with her because of her curvy shape and blue eyes. She was chosen as the Camp Cutie of the week in February, and the base paper included her portrait, but that didn't last either. After only a few weeks, she departed. She was allegedly assaulted by a sergeant with whom she shared a residence. She ran again. She was jailed for underage drinking in Santa Barbara in September 1943. When a policewoman apprehended her, she was 19 and seated in a bar. The well-known mugshot photo was taken during that time. The one in which she appeared both broken and defiant. In the end, the arresting officer felt sorry for her and allowed her to remain at home for 9 days. Elizabeth resisted being sent back to Massachusetts by the authorities. Instead, she traveled to Florida. Elizabeth Short was only 21 years old in 1945. She lacked money, a stable residence, and a clear route to success. However, her looks was the first thing that people noticed about her. Thus, she resorted to pin-up pictures, which were the only thing that offered her hope. She repeatedly appeared in the same outfits for photo shoots with photographer Arthur James. She hadn't always eaten. She laughed, posed, and attempted to look like she belonged in Hollywood, even if she occasionally looked worn out. She never begged for money, James subsequently claimed. All she wanted was for the appropriate people to see the pictures. They should open doors, she hoped. The visuals grew bolder over time. Not scandalous, but obviously bolder. She had to do it, not because she wanted to. Since she was slipping. She was aware of it. Those identical pictures would be presented as proof after her death years later. They were, however, her final opportunity in 1945. There was no agency for her. There were no links for her. The Brown Derby was what she had. In 1929, the well-known eatery with the curved roof had opened. It was crowded with actors, producers, and gossip columnists like Luella Parsons and Ha Hopper by the time Elizabeth began visiting in 1945. She rarely had money, but she would sit at the bar or locate a seat in the dining area, usually dressed as elegantly as she could manage. She usually got her lunch paid for by a man she had just met. She was lovely and amiable. She was afraid on the inside, but people enjoyed chatting to her. Her address book later contains 75 male names, according to the police. She met the majority of them at that eatery. She was fed by some. She was allowed to sleep in the apartments of others. She survived that way. She was broke at times. Then all of a sudden she would have money again. Vince Carter, a former cop, claimed that despite never having a work, she managed to make ends meet. However, such an existence was brittle. One incorrect person, one wrong step. It would only require that. The screen test followed. Her greatest opportunity. Her worst experience. She took the pin-up pictures in 1945, the same year it occurred. She was given permission to audition for a prominent studio, but as soon as she got started, everything quickly went south. The filmmakers didn't mince words. She wasn't trained, they said. She had a terrible voice. Her performance was unimpressive. She didn't belong in front of the camera, they argued. She was only a high school dropout with a lovely face and a dream, with no history of drama school or stage experience. Everything changed after the rejection. She became more reclusive. She began to drink more. She was more interested in males who made promises to her but never fulfilled them. She had lost her confidence. She became more desperate. She also became even more prone to putting her trust in the wrong individuals. Then the whispers turned into full-fledged headlines. She was accused of living a double life, being an escort, and having sold herself to make ends meet. However, the gossip did not match the truth. Subsequent FBI investigations revealed no proof that she had ever been a prostitute. That was supported by grand jury testimony. True Confessions, a 1977 book that twisted elements of her biography into something darker, was the source of the claims. But the claims stayed, even if they were untrue. A scandal was what people wanted. And Elizabeth became the ideal target even after she passed away. In reality, it was more straightforward and depressing. Men who liked her gave her presents. They allowed her to stay for a few nights, bought her food, and gave her money. They occasionally wished for anything in exchange. They didn't always. It wasn't a company, though. It was a matter of survival. And once she passed away, even that was used against her. The war was almost over when she met him. Elizabeth Short first saw Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr. on New Year's Eve 1944 on Miami Beach. He was already scarred from battle and a hero at the age of 23. He had shot down 2 Japanese Zeros in the air and completed more than 50 combat flights. Elizabeth never imagined that a fortuitous encounter at a party would become the closest thing she would ever experience to true love. They wrote to each other nonstop after that night. It was so severe that Matthew wrote his mother a letter that read, "In 11 days, she wrote me 27 letters." At the time, he was recuperating from a plane crash in India. He kept thinking about her despite his injuries. And he made a proposal in one of those letters. She agreed. She wrote to him with such passion that it overflowed like something too great to contain. He never returned home despite her warning, "When you come home, I'm never going to let you go, darling." His plane crashed again on August 10, 1945, less than a week before Japan surrendered and one day before he was scheduled to return to her. He didn't make it this time. He was 26. Elizabeth received a brief, incisive telegram from his mother. On his way home from India, Matt was killed in a plane crash. You have our sincerest sympathies. I hope it's not true. However, it was accurate. And Elizabeth's whole world fell apart. She never returned to her family. She floated. She was hollowed by the anguish. Lost in the solitude he left behind, the girl who had once penned letters full of optimism now roamed aimlessly. She arrived in Southern California in July 1946. Lieutenant Joseph Gordon Fickling was the other man she went there for. They had also met during the war in Florida. He was now assigned to Long Beach. There was strain in their relationship. She needed attention, but she still needed love. Fickling was harmed by the way she seduced other men. He didn't leave, though. They continued to write, meet, and make an effort. January 8, 1947, was the date of her last correspondence with him. She informed him that she intended to relocate to Chicago and pursue a career as a fashion model. The day before she disappeared, he received the letter. Nobody heard from her again after that. Her last several months were chaotic. She was impoverished. She had nowhere to live. She relocated throughout the city of Los Angeles. She lived with 8 other females in a small Hollywood apartment from November 13 to December 15, 1946. Even though the rent was cheap, she couldn't afford it. Fearing he would demand money, she would hide from the landlord. She borrowed money, clothes, lipstick, and everything else. She held on to her appearance as if it were her only remaining possession. She would negotiate her way out of paying or persuade them to let her stay. They would eventually ask her to leave, though. Once again, she did it alone. People claim that she was shy and nice, and that she didn't drink. However, something altered. A different story was recounted by those who knew her during those final months. She began to drink excessively. Almost every night, and perhaps more than one at a time, she was spotted with various males. Individuals muttered. She allegedly had affairs with married guys. Women didn't trust her, they said. Even her former camp cook boss took note. Elizabeth didn't go out at first. After that, she began to meet soldiers on a weekly basis. The reserved young woman became known as a man-eater. It might have been grief. It might have been survival. Perhaps it was both. Ultimately, though, it appeared as though she was spinning, looking for something in the eyes of strangers that she had once discovered in an Indian letter, something she would never find again. Her hopes were greater than her baggage when she arrived in Los Angeles in July 1946. She wasn't merely looking for work. She was searching for a name in lights, a sensation, or a concept. However, the only work she could find was as a waitress. In an attempt to get recognition, she worked evenings in the hopes that someone would give her more than a plate to carry. There was nothing remarkable about her room. Tucked somewhere where the noise never truly ceased, it was located on Hollywood Boulevard behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub. She was spotted by others. The head usher at the CBS Columbia Square Playhouse, Jack Edgar, claimed to have seen her at least 20 times. Perhaps she was observing the actors. Perhaps she hoped she would be studied. Demo tapes were never made by her. In Chicago, she never took modeling jobs. A young woman named Elizabeth Short was dropped off by her lover outside the Grand Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles on the evening of January 9, 1947. He was a 25-year-old married man called Robert Manley. Elizabeth wore all black clothing. She wore a beige coat. The width of her handbag was 12 inches. Her address book was in it. In the hotel lobby, she was observed making phone calls. She appeared anxious. The hotel workers recalled her tense appearance at 6:30 p.m. No one ever saw her alive again after that, although someone said they saw her again later that night at a local cocktail bar. After 6 days, the tragedy arrived. Around 10 in the morning on January 15, 1947, a mother and her young daughter were strolling through an empty lot in Lyard Park. Something pale caught her eye in the grass. Her legs halted as she approached, thinking it was a mannequin. The corpse that lay there had been sliced in two. Blood was absent. The flesh had a ghostly white color. Above the head, the arms were elevated. They spread their legs. The distance between the lower and upper bodies was precisely 1 foot. They had taken out the intestines and put them under the body. Everything had been thoughtfully planned by someone. She made a police call. What they discovered would be remembered forever. On January 22, there was an autopsy. Frederick Newbar was the doctor's name. He found something horrifying. Elizabeth's mouth was deeply wounded on both sides by the murderer. They gave her a contorted, smiling face that extended all the way to her ears. Her chest and thighs were cut with flesh. They discovered something that stunned everyone within her stomach. Human feces filled it. Therefore, she had to consume it before she passed away. A combination of brain damage and blood loss was the cause of death. Someone had cut her face. She had been struck hard in the skull. Before she passed away, she had lost a quarter of her blood. After that, the remainder was drained. Gasoline had been used to wash her body. Her murder was not the only goal of the assassin. He desired to remove all traces. She was no longer even referred to by her given name. She was given a moniker by the newspapers. She was referred to as the Black Dahlia. It all began when men at a drugstore in Long Beach made a comparison between her and the movie The Blue Dahlia. She wore black all the time. She had black hair colored. She had light skin. The name was utilized in headlines by reporters. It was mentioned in more than 500 articles in a month. The media had previously referred to it as the werewolf murder. However, the moniker Black Dahlia endured. It transformed Elizabeth from a real person into a representation of the most sinister secrets in Hollywood. The Los Angeles Examiner newspaper received an envelope 9 days after the body was discovered on January 24. Manila paper was used to make it. Cut-out letters from publications were displayed on the front. They said, "Here is Dahlia's belongings letter to follow." Her personal things, birth certificate, pictures, name-printed pieces of paper, and black address book were all in the envelope. The book was written by Mark Hansen. A few of the pages had been ripped out. Like her body, everything was smeared with gasoline. Someone claiming to be the murderer had called the newspaper 3 days prior. He said souvenirs will be sent. He fulfilled his pledge. Fingerprints on the envelope were discovered by the police, however, they were destroyed during transportation. They were useless to them. One of the largest investigations Los Angeles had ever seen was started by the police. There were more than 750 cops participating. Over 150 males were questioned. There were strangers, criminals, and physicians among them. There were 316 suspects, according to one report. 50 of them were taken into custody. There were no charges. They looked in storm drains. They looked through vacant homes. Even the river was in view. Nothing was helpful. A $10,000 reward was given by a city councilman. That would be more than $140,000 in today's currency. Nevertheless, nobody revealed the truth. Out of all the men, one stuck out the most. He was a doctor named George Hoddle. He had exceptional surgical skills. In 1936, he received his medical school degree. He had an IQ of 186. Steve Hoddle, his son, went on to become a detective. Something unsettling caught his attention. Elizabeth's body was cut in a manner similar to a procedure George had seen in the 1930s. The district attorney installed wiretaps in George Hotel's house in the beginning of 1950. The footage they captured was startling. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. George was heard stating that Ruth Spaulding, his secretary, had passed away from an unexplained overdose. Perhaps she knew too much. Although George was never indicted, the DA acknowledged that he knew Elizabeth. People all around the nation started confessing as the case progressed. They were accused of killing Elizabeth by more than 60 people. Officially, 19 were logged. A few of them were female. When one lady contacted the police, they didn't believe her when she stated, "I just stabbed a girl. I killed Elizabeth Short. She was barely 16 and residing on the East Coast when he dated her in 1941, according to another man. Another man, whose card was discovered in her purse, was employed by a real estate firm. Their lies squandered valuable time, but none of their stories were credible. Then something even more sinister appeared. Deep corruption inside the Los Angeles Police Department was discovered by a grand jury in 1949. They discovered that high-ranking officers were accepting bribes from criminals such as Mickey Cohen. Every day, thousands were made by a prostitute ring. It was being guarded by the LAPD Vice Unit. $50 was paid to one officer for each female who worked. In today's currency, that would be $56,000 a week. On June 30, 1949, the police chief was forced to resign due to the incident. A number of cops were accused of perjury. Everything was tainted by the corruption. The Dahlia case has also been impacted. The evidence was nowhere to be found. They hushed the witnesses. Investigators were blocked. The district attorney had created a confidential list of 22 potential suspects. That list included Georgiel, but there were others. There were many who thought that Hollywood helped hide the truth. Elizabeth knew men in the movie business. Among them was the owner of the address book, Mark Hansen. He reportedly became weary of her persistent requests for money. He wasn't alone, according to some. Perhaps she had been wanted by a strong person. Perhaps the murderer had concealed himself behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood by using his medical expertise. Perhaps the probe was halted by someone with police ties. The possibility of a cover-up has persisted. The case is still open. Contemporary investigators revisited the crime scene years later. They made use of photographs that were improved. Near the location where the body was laid, they saw odd marks in the earth. She'd bent her arms into precise angles. Her legs were equally spaced. There was not a single drop of blood. Somewhere else, she had been murdered. With a photo transmission device known as Sound Photo, the FBI was able to identify her in just 56 minutes. The situation hadn't been left to chance, according to one of the doctors. Whoever did this surgical procedure was a very fine surgeon. It was planned. It was supposed to be discovered. The Black Dahlia is a movie that came out in 2006. Scarlett Johansson was the star. Brian De Palma was the director. The film's production cost was $50 million. It made little less than that. Palma's relationship with major studios ended as a result of the disaster. James Ellroy's novel served as the inspiration for the narrative. He had witnessed the murder of his own mother. Some readers forgot the novel was fiction because it felt so real. The film failed to deliver justice, despite being nominated for an Oscar in cinematography. The pain in Elizabeth's family never went away. At first, her mother didn't think she was dead. The pain was exacerbated when Elizabeth's boyfriend's private letters were leaked to the media. No one ever told her the whole facts, even though her sister had lived right down the street from Elizabeth's murder site. George's son, Steve Hodel, accused his own father in a book he wrote years later. The case file continued to expand until it reached over 3,000 pages.